Welcome to Cornell Keynotes. I'm Brad Bell, the William J. Conady Professor of Strategic Human Resources in the ILR School at Cornell, and I also serve as the Director for our Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies. Very excited today to be joined by my colleagues Chris Collins and Kevin Cox to introduce the CAHRS HRBP, World-Class HRBP Framework, which we've been working over the past year to develop, and we're very excited to share with you today. In today's keynote, we'll provide some background on how this project got started. We'll share a bit about the process that we used to develop the model. We'll provide a high-level overview of the model and also share a few ideas on how your organizations might be able to use the framework going forward. I want to note that this session today is part of a 5-part series that will be airing between now and mid-December. And in subsequent sessions, we'll be going deeper into different parts of the framework. So certainly hope that you'll be joining us for some of those keynotes as well. We've also built in some time for some Q&A into today's session, so I would encourage you to please share your questions or comments in the chat as we go through. Before diving in, I'd like to introduce our two guests today. Here in the studio, I'm joined by my colleague Chris Collins, who is also a professor of human resource studies in the ILR School at Cornell. Chris preceded me as director of CAHRS and currently serves as the director of ILR's Master's in Industrial Relations graduate program. Chris is an expert in strategic HR and also has a lot of experience working to develop and coach HR business partners. Joining us remotely today is Kevin Cox, who is the founder and president of LKC Advisory and is currently serving as a CAHRS Executive Fellow. I recently saw Kevin referred to on LinkedIn as an HR legend, which certainly is fitting given his long and distinguished career in the HR field. Kevin has many accolades, but I'll highlight that he retired last year as GE's CHRO and previously served as CHRO of both American Express and Pepsi Bottling Group. So let's get to it. So Kevin, I'll stay with you to talk a bit about, why do we need an HRBP framework? I know that you previously led the development of the model of a world-class CHRO, which has since really become the definitive guide on how to maximize the value of the CHRO. And when we first started talking about this project, you felt like there was really an opportunity to do something similar for the HR business partner role. So can you talk a little bit about what you see as the value and purpose of a framework like this?
So great to be here. Thanks, Brad. It's good to see you. And I will say up front, this has been a lot of fun to work on with the two of you, as well as the team that we assembled almost a year ago, like you said, probably back in October. First of all, the HR business partner to me is an incredibly important link in the value chain of HR. It's in most companies, and whatever you call the HRBP, I realize it can go by a few different titles. It's the most direct link to those leading the businesses. And so it is the face of HR to many. And I think that makes it a very, very important group to think about. It's a huge group. I have no idea how many HRBPs there might actually be, but most companies have several. And to me, it's a large addressable market. And groups like heads of total rewards or heads of talent have communities that they go to and they benefit from and they develop through. And I don't think the HR business partner community really has a similar group. And I think that's a miss. And I know this is something that the three of us have been talking about doing for quite a long time. And I'm just thrilled we were able to actually advance it and debut it here today. It's also a really critical role in the development. You talked about CHROs. When I look back to my own development and my own growth, I got a great deal out of it through the time I spent as an HR business partner. It was my most direct business-facing role. I learned more about P&Ls and more about cost structures and more about growth plans and annual operating plans. I felt like I was in a foxhole with the team that I was part of in the business. Some of my best friends to this day, and this goes back some years, were the business leaders that I worked with, supported, and partnered with. So to me, it's a really important part of your development in the HR space. I think that's another reason I'm excited to do it. And finally, uh, I think that this is a space that CAHRS can really do quite a bit with. I'll say maybe even own it. I'm not trying to be competitive about that, but I think it's an area, it's a family of jobs that CAHRS, given its rich heritage, its rich lineage, can do quite a bit with. So to me, it was only natural to partner with CAHRS and our member companies and the two of you to bring this to life. So I just really couldn't be more excited about the launch of it, and really appreciative of the work that got us to this point.
And Kevin, I know when we started, you, I think, also felt like with all the change going on in work today, and everybody's talking about the future of work, that it's really the HR business partners that are on the front line of realizing and navigating that for their organizations, right?
I think so. I mean, and you may get into this later, Brad. And when we talk to the leaders, because a really important part of this is we wanted to escape the echo chamber of HR only talking with other HR. When we talk to the business leaders, I think they validated the premise of your question, Brad. Business leaders are counting on HRBPs to help them navigate this question that you could broadly call the future of work. We may talk more about AI. I'll be surprised if we don't today. That's kind of a top of mind subject for everybody. But whether it's helping navigate productivity challenges, how do we do more with less? Helping to navigate AI and where does it have a place in our organization and where does it not? Helping to navigate structure and how to make organizations work the way they are supposed to work or intended to work. I feel like the HRBP is on the tip of that blade, that knife's edge, and they really, I believe, play an important role. And I think they can use more support and more help to deal with those very challenging but very exciting questions, for sure.
Great. So as you just alluded to, throughout the series, you'll be hearing from not only Kevin, Chris, and I, but we also wanted to bring in some other perspectives. And really, the goal of this model is to really, cut across different industries, sizes of organizations, et cetera. So we asked 5 current CHROs that are members of the CAHRS Advisory Board for their perspectives on different parts of the framework. These CHROs are highly regarded HR leaders that work across multiple industries, so consumer products, tech, manufacturing, and so on. And one of the questions we asked them is, similar to what I just asked Kevin, why do we need an HRBP framework? What is the value of such a framework? So let's go to the video and see what they share with us.
3 things that really are top of mind. One is role clarity. When it's a framework like this makes it abundantly clear to an HR business partner where they should be leaning in, how they should be spending their time, and then it can be consistent across your organization. No matter what HRBP is aligned to what organization, this is what they're going to be focused on. The second piece is around capability building. So an HR business partner can look across this framework and say, hey, I've got some of the pieces of this, but not all of the pieces, and where should I be leaned in to get training or have some experiences that I can have that can get me some deeper experience in some of these areas to round me out as an HR business partner. And we have a lot of people on my team who aspire to be an HR business partner. They think that's the creme de la creme of being on the people team. And they can leverage this to figure out, okay, what kind of experiences and training and roles do I need to have maybe in COEs and other things that could prepare me at some day to be in a place where someone would select me to be an HR business partner. And then the final piece is just around being able to have the most strategic impact as possible with the business. Being able to plan with a business leader and show a business leader, like, this is what HR business partnering looks like. This is where we can lean in. This is where we can play. Let's talk about what makes the most sense for your organization.
A framework for HR business partners is helpful so that all of our HR professionals can perform their best and they have clarity on the expectations for their role. By creating the framework for a world-class HR business partner, we're providing a strong foundation for them to understand where to focus on delivering value for their clients and where to build new skills and capabilities to become more well-rounded. This framework also provides flexibility for companies to adapt to their organizational structure and priorities.
We use a framework in our company as well, which very closely resembles the product which all of you are looking at right now. We define our mission as having people and organizations be at their best. And to be able to do that, we have clarified 3 areas of work, very consistent with this framework. First, hire great people and develop them throughout their career. Second, put them in a great environment so that they can be at their best. And 3, stitch them together into a team effort, also all these individual components into a team effort so that the team and organization can be at their best. So I think this is critical work for us to direct the work of our HR organizations. It helps us define the capabilities and skills needed within our HR communities, stay ahead of emerging trends and business needs, and adds a strategic element which helps us rise above transactional day-to-day work and really elevates the work of HR professionals in every part of the company.
So I'm super excited about the idea of building a business HR partner framework because I think it's one of the most crucial roles we have in our HR organizations. And because it has such a generalist capacity associated with it, then sometimes you kind of can't really get a handle on what should I be focusing on? How should I be spending my time? What does good look like? How can I help with my business partner kind of shape and contract accountabilities and deliverables? And so having a framework really provides a backdrop for that.
It gives more structure. It gives definition, support to the business partner function, which I think is really important. It helps provide a path for their skill development so they can grow and have a roadmap for where they're going in their careers. And it also provides a shared understanding for business leaders and business partners about what to expect from the role. And so I think that's a lot of clarity. And when I reflect on business partners, they operate a lot in this element of gray. It's not always a black or white answer. And so tackling ambiguous work and not having a playbook is something that role is used to. Yet this is going to be an opportunity to do what I think there's been a gap, right? They don't always have a group of peers to come together and share learnings and knowledge like COEs often do. So I think this really provides some structure and a sense of community that'll really add value to this important population in our HR organizations.
So Kevin, looking at those videos, I think the CHROs made many of the same points that you did in your remarks, but does anything in particular kind of really stand out to you or anything that you heard really resonate?
I think Jennifer kicked it off. I'll just say 2 words: role clarity. And everybody kind of, like you said, Brad, built on that point. These are hard-working people across HR organizations. They are under pressure. They are being asked to deliver more and more, often with less and less. So to me, role clarity is probably the most important takeaway that I think you might want to have at this point. And earlier you mentioned the world-class CHRO model. When we were seeking to do that work several years ago, we were actually trying to solve the same question. What is the job? Let's define that. Let's define that broadly, and let's put some aspiration to it. Let's set that bar pretty high so that all of us have a general North Star that we're attempting to try to navigate. So I think we're trying to do that same kind of thinking with the HRBP. And the reason I love the framework term so much is, to me, it's the perfect balance between structure and clarity, but giving organizations enough room to adjust that model to fit their particular business need, like Bala talked about. So framework, I think, is trying to give structure, but not trying to give it in such a cookie cutter, confining fashion that it has limitations.
Thanks, Kevin. And Chris, I know, as I said at the outset, you've worked with a lot of HRBPs over the years, helping to develop and coach them throughout their careers. So you're very familiar with the challenges they face. And I imagine the CHROs are coming at it largely from how do they set a structure for their teams, but kind of taking the perspective of HRBPs themselves. What do you see as the value of the framework for them personally?
Yeah, that's great. The biggest takeaway, and I think multiple of them mentioned this, which is the idea that this job has changed a lot in the last 10 and 15 years. And company to company, it's a little different. So having some, as Kevin mentioned, a true North Star, like what could this job be? Super important to give them guidance, help them think about what skills can I develop? What else could I do to help my leaders drive results of this organization? I think the other one that multiple mention is, it's something I always talk with people about, is have you contracted with the line leaders you support so they actually know why you're there? This gives great talking points to kind of sit down collectively with the leaders you support and here's what I think I can do for you. Here's the way I can support you. It just gives a great starting point to have those conversations.
Great. Great. So in a minute, we're going to take a few of your questions. We've seen some coming in already. If you have thoughts or questions, please do put them in the chat and we'd be happy to tackle those. Before doing that, we did want to take a few seconds just to share a bit about how the model, the framework was developed, because we put a lot of time and energy into this to really, again, try to develop a model that we hope will have broad applicability, that really resonates not just within HR, but also the business. And so, we started out with a couple guiding principles. One is we really wanted the framework to capture the diversity of the HRBP role as it plays out across different contexts. So we started with by conducting several working groups that were attended by 32 experienced HRBPs from across 24 of our CAHRS partner companies. And this really allowed us to identify the most critical elements of the role, regardless of company industry, size, geography, etc. While we know that there'll always be some nuance in what the role looks like from one company to another, or one context to another, we feel that this process has really allowed us to develop a framework that's hopefully generalizable across organizations. Second, as I think Chris just alluded to, is we really wanted the framework to be aspirational. We didn't want it to just capture what are HRBPs doing just in their day to day, because we know that HRBPs often get mired down in a lot of transactional work and are trying to find ways to really add strategic value. So to do this, we sat down with a group of CHROs, again, from our CAHRS partner companies, to really understand, what do they expect? What are they looking for from their best HRBPs? What do they hope that their HRBPs are focusing their time and attention on as they go throughout their work? We also wanted to really gain their insight into, not just what the role looks like today, but with everything that's happening, as Kevin talked about with AI and how it's transforming work, how is that likely to shape the HRBP role in the future so that the framework will hopefully be somewhat future-proofed? And we found this feedback from the CHROs really helpful for further refining the model. Finally, we wanted to make sure that the framework really was aligned with what business leaders themselves want and expect from their HRBPs. We didn't want the framework to be too HR-centric. We wanted it to resonate from the standpoint of the business. So to do that, kind of at the tail end of the development process, we interviewed a group of senior business leaders to really understand, again, what have they seen from their best HRBPs? What do they look for them to be delivering to them regularly? And use that to create several updates to the framework. So this was an iterative process. It's partly why this took over a year to develop, but I think we're all really happy with how it turned out and feel that it does capture the diversity of the role and really brings in how different stakeholders view and what they expect from their HR business partners. So before we actually share the model, which you're probably all really excited to see, we do want to take a few of your questions. And again, I've seen a few come in. One that has come in just in response to this issue around the development process, and Chris, maybe I'll direct this first one to you, is, as we talk to some of these different groups, whether it's the HRBPs themselves or the CHROs or the line leaders, did we see any differences in their responses or how they kind of viewed the role?
Yeah, I think that in general, there's fairly good agreement on key parts of the model. I do think we saw differences a little bit between industries, not a ton. We saw differences certainly between people that support central functions versus those that may be embedded out in a business unit. But we did see that the business leaders had a distinct perspective. And I think the one thing that they called out the most is understanding that this HR person, in the end of the day, should be held responsible for helping to drive business results. And that was a clear message from us to them, that that's a key responsibility, that not all of them realize that that should be part of the remit of their HR business partner, and asked us questions like, should that be part of their performance review every year as to how they impacted results? So I think in general, we saw a lot of commonality, but certainly it led to us creating more flexibility in the model.
Yeah, great. So a question has come in also from AJ and Kevin. I'll direct this one to you because I think you referenced it a bit in the context of the CHRO model that you developed. The question is, do you plan to translate the framework into an HRBP capability model as well? And as you, again, mentioned in context of the world-class CHRO model, really what we're trying to do here is to map the role. What are the key responsibilities and tasks? But I think in the future, the goal would be to then break that down into capabilities. But I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
At the advisory board in terms of priorities, I hope the answer is yes, and I agree with your kind of intro there. Getting the North Star figured out, and the trick to this is sort of like Chris talked about. Think about this as a vertebrae in a spine. If you had perfect alignment between what a function head like a CHRO or chief people officer is looking for, perfect alignment between that and the business leader, the P&L, the general managers, the division presidents, whatever they're called, and the HRBP and whatever they're called, if you had perfect alignment, just think how much faster and how much more confidence and clarity you could really drive. We don't have as much of that as we need. Chris talked about a couple of those reasons. So there's a lot of work to be done there. Secondly, you talked about future-proofing it, Brad. If the CHRO model is any indication, we first did that work in 2017. We refreshed it again in 2022, kind of a 5-year shelf life if you want to think about it. And I'm not exactly sure when version 3 will sort of emerge, but I'm pretty sure there will be a version 3. So the idea is to set this out with aspiration and with future, but to also, when enough things have changed, that the model needs to be revisited to have it be flexible and nimble enough to deal with that. I hope that with the model mapped, as you said, that the next step is to create development, we'll call it a kit or an approach or something like that to help fill in some of the gaps that people do have in their development. And again, I hope CAHRS endorses that work. I think they will. And that to me would be a logical next step.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Kevin. Another question. This one's from Emily, and Chris, I'll direct this to you. Kind of curious about, she says, curious about when we talk about aspirational, have we seen cases where those aspirations can actually come to fruition, or is the typical HRBP still finding themselves really mired down in the day-to-day kind of transactional work?
Yes. There's no great answer to that. So I think, in my best estimation, across the hundreds of HRBPs I talk to on a yearly basis, I don't think anyone's doing all of this model, because I don't think you can, in any day, week, month, do all of this. So I think when we talk about aspirational, this might be your year, this might be 2 years to touch all these boxes. So I think will always be aspirational for everybody.
Yeah, it's great. So I saw another question come in from Nick. And Nick, I'm going to hold on your question because we're going to kind of go to the model. But Nick's question was around, how do you manage the tension between really developing business unit specific solutions and really pushing a more consistent approach for the work. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris now to kind of walk us through a high level view of the model. And I think, Nick, you'll find that that is a key piece of the model that came out through our discussions with various stakeholders of this process. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you to walk us through the framework itself.
So just as a forewarning, this is going to be the 40,000 foot view, because we do have the following sessions that will dig into the different components and go deeper. But when we think about the model, we start at the roof and the floor of the house, or the Parthenon, however we want to think about the framework. And again, going back to those conversations with business leaders and with CHROs, that in the end of the day, the top piece, super important to get everybody refocused on, at the end of the day, I'm here to help drive results for this particular unit that I'm supporting. So that could be for nonprofit, maybe different goals in for-profit businesses. But at the end of the day, I'm be really clear, what are the results we're trying to drive in this particular unit, and how am I supporting that? At the foundation, we originally had this as one box, and we've separated into two. And I think it's important to do that. And one side of that is we really need HRBPs to understand, help to operationalize, and as importantly, help to influence the development of strategy in the business unit you support. So not just to be there to execute when someone says we've got an HR thing, but you need to have a clear voice on what is the strategy, what should the strategy be, and how are we going to make that strategy come to life. On the other side of that, because things are changing so much, really need to make sure we have our ear to the outside world to really understand what's happening that's new in our industry, what's happening new with technology, what are changing consumer trends, what's changing in the broader world around us, and what does that mean for our business, and how might that impact our current strategy, what new strategies would that be? So really, again, the foundations of being involved in the strategy, both current and future, and then really thinking about how we're driving the business results. The first point of tensions I think we start to see is the blue box right up from the bottom, which they're constant tensions of what you're there and who you're supporting. So on one extreme of that is you're definitely there to craft solutions specific to your business unit for the conditions you face, for the kinds of employees that you're supporting, the kind of results you're trying to get. Is you have to be able to craft solutions to your business unit. And with that, you often have to draw on resources from the center, whether that's COEs or shared services, to get the support to execute on ideas to really support the business. On the opposite end of that is you're also there to help drive corporate initiatives, whether that's from the CHRO, from a COE. So you're also there to help bring corporate ideas down to the business and make sure those are driven. And somewhere in the middle, I think you've got a great opportunity to influence the center, because you may be seeing trends, you may be seeing changes that they haven't seen across all the businesses yet. So can you elevate some of those things so they become part of a larger corporate-wide initiative? So you have certainly your own business you're supporting the execution of the big ideas from corporate, but also are you filtering things up to them to help think about future priorities for the COE or the headquarters in general. Then the orange and red boxes really are the levers we think of as how you drive specific business results. And we broke those into three main categories. So the first of those is really thinking about talent and leadership. Middle box really being about driving organizational effectiveness. Third box really being about employee value proposition. I'm going to break those down individually. So the talent and leadership is really making sure we've got the right capabilities in our leaders so that those leaders are driving the business. The leadership team is working well together. There's good team dynamics. We've got successors in the pipeline for those leaders, because you don't get anywhere in driving business results if we don't have the right leadership team. So play a critical role in thinking about who's on the team, how are we developing people for that team, how do we have the right team dynamics and capability. But don't trade that off just to think about leaders only, but we also have to think about the core critical roles that drive business. And do we have the right people in those roles? Do we have people with the right capabilities? Do they have a good succession path? Do they have ready successors? Should they get promoted or leave? So we got to really think about, do we have the individual talent? To me, this is very much a individuals with specific names that I'm trying to develop, manage, drive. The middle box I think of as more high-level HR strategies. So really thinking about, how many of these different types of roles, what do those roles look like, where are we sourcing those roles? Really, it's a long-term human capital plan against our current strategy, or potentially because the way things are changing, what's that HR human capital strategy going to look like as we move into a new market, or we have shifting ways that we're going to compete. So I have to think about both current HR strategy and all the elements of that, but also thinking about how we're going to evolve and transition to drive the next new thing or meet changing needs in the business. Third box then really gets us back to, I think, the original roots of HR is, have we created a place that attracts people, where people feel they can do their best work, where they feel engaged, committed, and really want to give their best effort every day? And so we broke that down into two components. One being, how do we craft a culture? How do we craft an environment where people see the norms, the values, the expectations of how we work here together, and really buy into kind of that belief and philosophy of who we are as a company? And the second box really being about the employee experience. And this is a crucial place for HR business partners to play a role, because every employee experiences their relationship differently, and that's partly driven by HR, but it's also driven by the technology they're working on, the lighting of the workplace. And so a lot of what's going to happen in that employee experience box is going to come through partnership outside of HR to really craft the right workplace. Again, across those three big boxes and the 6 boxes below, you can't do them all at once. So there's, again, a set of tensions and trade-offs on what am I working on this week, this month, this year as my priorities, because again, you can't probably do all of those all the time.
Great, thanks for the overview, Chris. And I'll just reiterate what Chris started with, which is this was the 40,000-foot view. We'll be going in the subsequent keynotes that we'll be doing. We'll be going into a deep dive into each of these different parts of the framework. We're also putting in a link into the chat in today's session that will take you to a landing page where you can download an interactive version of this framework and can double click on some of these different boxes to read more about some of the thinking behind them. Maybe before moving on, I saw an interesting question come in, and Kevin, I'll direct this to you. I think it was in response to really putting the drive business results at the top of this model. And the question is, how should HRBP performance be evaluated, by business results, HR execution, or both? And how much weight do you put on those, and how do you control for maybe things are outside of the control of the HRBP themselves? And I'm sure these are questions that you always had to wrestle with when you were in these CHRO roles. I mean, how did you think about what to really kind of set as those performance metrics for the HRBP?
Template of the performance appraisal for HRBP. I would start with the top 4 boxes on the model that Chris just walked through. I agree with the business leader that mentioned to us business performance really should matter and should be part of the accountability of an HRBP. If you're on that team, you win as a team and you lose as a team. So I completely believe that you should be held accountable proportionally to the performance of the unit. And the top 3 boxes, talent and leadership, org effectiveness, and employee value proposition, that would be the headers that I would begin to assess, promote, compensate HRBPs on the basis of. The mix is going to change. May change by the business cycle you're in, may change by the industry that you're in, may change by the management philosophy. Are you a decentralized company or a heavily centralized company? Are you functionally led? Are you general management led? And the beauty of this model is that it is adaptable to all of those possibilities. But I, first of all, would say you do need to be assessed in part on business results. I don't think you gain the respect of those that you are there to support unless you do that. But I think it's an and, not an or.
That's great. Thanks, Kevin. So we'll come back to a few more of your questions here in a minute. Before doing that, we wanted to take a moment to address the question of how might you use this framework? Obviously, a framework is only as good as its applications. And some of you, I think already by looking at your questions, I've already started thinking about this. Can we use this to build out a capability model and so forth? So again, we asked the CHROs on our board this question around how do they plan to use the framework in their own organization. So let's look at what they said and then we'll react to that.
So the framework is going to be very useful for people like myself and my HR team so that we can actually create development efforts and programs and pathways for growing our business HR pipeline and our business HR talent teams. And we've each been kind of inventing this ourselves. And now that CAHRS is going to create and install a framework for us, we're going to get the benefit of the best thinking to apply to that model. And we'll be able to share back our learnings and contribute to the model being something that's alive and reflective of what currently is happening in businesses. The other thing I think is that this is one of the most important talent pools in a company. And in a pinch, like you really can't call a consulting firm or call a scaling partner to help you where you have a gap, like you can if you have a compensation expertise problem or a learning and development support problem, or you need some help recruiting. There's a lot of vendors that specialize in these niches that you can scale with your teams. You can't do that with business HR. And so I think this is going to be great as well. So we can get better at thinking about what's the pipeline, how are we growing that pipeline? And this framework is going to give us a way to start to think about what are skills, how do we start to build skill blocks, how do we help our business partners or our Center of Excellence team members that want to move into business HR or vice versa, have pathways and a way to know how to do that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really helpful for us internally to compare our own framework to this one. I mean, we have an HR business partner framework, but this one and seeing how those two things align and where they don't will be really instructive and informative. And I think that's especially true because CAHRS has put such great effort into really pulling the gold standard across lots of different businesses, across industries, across sizes, across locations. And I think that provides a real source of good, competent information that we can use to drive ourselves forward as we look at what's the next generation within Workday.
At IBM, we plan to use this framework by incorporating it into our performance expectations. In addition, we will put it into our learning, reskilling, and development plans so we can develop the next generation of HR business partners.
Strategy, set strategy. We have defined our people and organization strategy very consistently with the way the framework defines it. Like I said at the top of the video, we have three components to the work, right? So great talent, a great employee experience, and a great organization which integrates all of this into one integrated effort. So these are the three components. So my recommendation to HR practitioners is, as you define strategy and as you define priorities and as you define mission for your HR teams, use the framework to define it. It'll ensure that your work is correctly targeted, is holistic, and you're not missing some important element out. And personally, you will show up in a way that is strategic and relevant to the needs of your business and the employees that you serve.
I think you can also definitely leverage it to plan with your business leader where you're going to lean in and what the year is going to look like ahead in terms of what the most strategic priorities are across that framework. It's going to be different for every organization and different for every leader depending on where they are and what their needs are. And this is a great, kind of table stakes way of setting that out and looking across all the different areas where HRBPs can play and aligning on that up front. So there's real clarity on what the priorities are for the HR business partner team for any organization.
So Chris, I think we heard a lot of different use cases there. Any of them really kind of stand out to you, again, as you've worked with HRBPs and have thought about ways this framework might be most helpful for them?
Yeah, I would pick up off of Jennifer's last point, which is this is a great way to think about the year or half year of having those discussions with your leaders and figuring out what are their priorities collectively, from the strategy we're trying to drive to what are the key levers we're going to have to make that come to fruition in this time period. So I think that conversation piece is the one I picked up on the most.
Great. And Kevin, again, going from the perspective of a HR leader trying to manage a team of HRBPs, what did you hear in the videos that really resonated with you and how you've used these frameworks in the past yourself?
So, say all in. Talked about I'm going to use it. I'm going to develop learning strategies on this. I'm going to help develop the next generation of HRBPs. I think that was a really strong endorsement of how Nickel and IBM plan to use it. And if I were still in the job, I think that would be an approach that I might take. This model is designed to be adaptable. It's designed to try to split the difference between precision and relevance. That's not an easy thing to do, but I think the team that put all this together navigated that pretty well. So the first thing I would think about is embrace it. Embrace it, make it your own. If you need to customize it and you need to tweak it to sort of fit your context, then go right ahead and do that. But sort of take the first steps toward really utilizing it and really experimenting with it versus sort of stay back too long and sort of stare at it and see if it's going to be relevant, or maybe approach it skeptically, wondering whether, the model you have is better than the one we're offering right now. I would just take a step into it. And I'd like to think if I were still leading HR in one of these companies, that's what I would do.
Great advice. Thanks, Kevin. So we're going to wrap up here in a minute, but we'd love to take a few more of your questions before we do. And maybe, Kevin, I'll come back to you for this question from Adele. Her question is, was there any consensus about where the most significant developmental gaps exist for HRBPs? And she says specifically in terms of those three levers: talent and leadership, organizational effectiveness, and really that employee value proposition. Are there, maybe also based on your own experience, are there one of those areas where you see that HRBPs struggle with the most in general?
I actually think it's two of the three, Brad. Talent and leadership, by and large, I would say people get most quickly and most completely. Can argue about how good of a job we might be doing against it because that bar continues to go up every year. But I'm not sure that every HRBP, or maybe many of them, actually believe that the organizational effectiveness of the unit or units that they are assigned to lies mostly in their court. And if it's working as designed, terrific and congratulations. More often than not, it is not working as designed, and there's work to do on that. And so whether it's the productivity challenges that most companies that are growth limited are dealing with is one of them, or the change and transformation that really this rapid economy that we're all experiencing right now requires. Those are areas that I would say we are generally not as well built as we need to be. And then on the employee value proposition, I think sometimes there's a tendency for HRBPs to think that this belongs to somebody above them on the org chart. And I would say that just like that old saying, all politics are local, I would say the employee value proposition is pretty local as well. And I think that HRBPs would do well to embrace that part of their role. Like, I have to put a culture on the field. I have to have a reason to compete for talent that's really relevant to where I am geographically, where I am in terms of the nature of the business. And I have to embrace that. I cannot count on a C-suite to do that exclusively for me. So I would say of the three, the ones in the middle and the one on the right are the ones that need more attention.
That's great. Thanks, Kevin. So I also got a question from Dan. Maybe I'll direct this one to you, Chris. Kind of asks, under the talent and leadership, why focus or why call out specifically the critical role talent? Why not make it leaders for, non-leaders or all employees? Why specifically call out that critical role?
I think part of it's just prioritization, that you can't do everything. So if I come in as a consultant, I'm coaching someone, the first thing I tend to look at is, do you have the right leaders, and who are the key critical roles that are driving the bulk of the returns, value that's being created? And if you're not managing those too well, it doesn't matter what you do with the other group. That's also important, but not as important. So it's really about prioritization. I just want to tag on to Adele's one too, because I do think those three at the top matter a lot, as Kevin mentioned. But what I'm increasingly seeing, and we do lots of programs with senior HRBPs, and I'm still a bit stunned that we're not better at those bottom two boxes, that we keep as HR leaving those up to other people. And that's pushing more and more companies to think about non-HR people filling these HRBP roles. And I know those non-HRB people won't be nearly as strong in the top three boxes. So if I was going to double down on anything, I'd actually double down on the bottom two boxes.
Makes sense. So saw a great question come in from Ida as well. Do we have plans to develop a framework for a similar framework for COEs? Maybe that'll be a future project for us, but we'd love to get this one out first before we tackle that. So thanks again for all of you for joining us today. Just a few quick reminders before we close. As I've mentioned a few times, this is the first part of a 5-part series. So we have the second part will be airing in 2 weeks, and then we'll be on more or less a 2-week rhythm through mid-December. So would certainly encourage you to join us for those sessions as you're able to. Also want to encourage you to visit the landing page that we've shared with you throughout this session. You can register for those additional keynotes at that page. You can download this framework. We will be continuing to develop various resources and tools and playbooks to support this work. So you'll be able to access those on that same page in the future as well. So visit the page and come back occasionally to see what new resources you may be able to tap into there. So I'd like to thank my colleagues, Chris Collins and Kevin Cox, for joining me today. Thank you for all of you for joining us and hope to see you at the future keynotes. Have a great day.